Good evening and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate they've been looking for. Should all acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? That famous song, sung with much zeal and vigor when the year is about to end, while others actually live it by leaving the past behind and trying to build a fresh and new future. Such is the case with many this year. It indeed has been an interesting one, starting with the most vicious election campaign, followed by a landslide victory of a rookie and much ridiculed F&M government. As the year moved on, though, we saw former cabinet ministers being handcuffed and dragged before the courts for alleged improprieties. An electrical company declares millions missing, and the suspects are inside. Clerks, bankers, and lawyers. A hurricane devastates our southern islands, and much, much more. Well, tonight we are going to discuss all the highlights of the year with journalists and talk show hosts Shanique Miller and Quincy Parker. Our topic is our Bahamaland Year in Review. It's all on the record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side.
On the Record is brought to you by Alive, the nation's newest and best LTE network.
Good to be alive.
Do you believe in light? Do you believe in love? Do you believe in precious moments? Do you believe in magic? Do you believe in tradition? Do you believe in family? Do you believe in home? I believe in the best Christmas ever. For everyone, everywhere. Believe in best. Alive.
Is your loved one celebrating a birthday? Or maybe they're commemorating a special occasion and you don't know what to get them? Why not get them something custom made from Executive Printers? At Executive Printers, you can create personalized calendars, greeting cards, and even playing cards just for them. A one-of-a-kind gift. They can even do personalized cups, mugs, keychains, coasters, and notepads. So come in and place an order today. We are located on Jerome Avenue South, or log on to epbahamas.com for more info.
Welcome back to On the Record. Our topic tonight, our Bahamaland Year in Review. Our guests on tonight's show, journalists Shanique Miller and Quincy Parker. Welcome back to On the Record. I could not think of a better way to end the year, talk about Year in Review, but to have you folks on, you certainly welcome back. You were some of our more exciting guests in the year, so we decided to bring you back. But certainly no one better to sort of put the year into context than journalists who are able to see it, I guess, from both sides, as a ordinary person, but certainly as a media person. Undoubtedly, the most significant thing of the year would be the elections, excuse me, and the change in government, the landslide win of the Free National Movement, the crushing defeat of the PLP, and even the loss of a seat by a sitting prime minister. Did you ever envision this outcome as last year, this time, we knew we were going into an election year. Did you ever envision in all of your years Did you ever envision an outcome as we saw on May 10th?
I will take first swing at that.
By all means, sir, yes.
In another forum, I had cause to make a prediction about the election. My prediction was, I had two predictions to make. My public prediction, which I did, as I said, on the public arena, was that the Free National Movement would win something on the order of 27, 28 of the seats, which would be, a serious blow in terms of the national politics. My private view, which I expressed to my family, was that the FNM was probably going to win 30 seats. In no universe did I expect that they would win more than 30. Did I anticipate Mr. Christie losing his seat? Frankly speaking, yes. Because the generals that you speak to, right? His generals,
And privately, because what they tell you privately.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And his generals were the ones that I spoke to livid. They were furious. They were upset at him personally. And the ones who weren't personally angry were saying that he's not paying attention. He's not listening to the young people. He's not listening to what people are saying he needs to do. And so I actually did have him on my private poll losing his seat. I thought that there would be egg on my face in my family group because there was no way the sitting prime minister is going to lose his seat. But the indications were there. And even if they had won when they took it to the election court, the fact that they would have won by enough to have gone to an election court signifies a 2,000 vote swing against Mr. Christie from the last election. That's a tremendous loss of support for a sitting prime minister. That it was even close enough to have to go to an election court represents a rejection of Mr. Christie in a personal manner that I think is definitely one of the stories, maybe of the decade, certainly not only of this year.
How has this election changed the political landscape? Because it, by no stretch of the imagination, is it ever going to be business as usual in politics in the Bahamas again?
It's changed it significantly. I mean, there are so many variables, and just to kind of sort of answer and put my 2 cents in on the first question, I spoke with reporters covering both, and I personally saw the shift taking place in favor of the FNM, but certainly I would fight tooth and nail with Quincy or anybody else. No way would a sitting prime minister lose his seat. I don't care how close they kind of predicted the race would be, never in a million years. And so what's changed with the landscape is this. One, you cannot predict what the Bahamian people are saying and what they're thinking. Two, you'd better listen to them because they were very, very, as Quincy said, rightly so, quite upset with a number of things the PLP and particularly the sitting Prime Minister at the time, Perry Christie, had done or had not done. And so when they made that decision, what that says is, listen, really, there is no kind of political landscape anymore. Anything could happen. And in fact, people kind of think the next 5 years could be something totally different based on how the Bahamian people are feeling and the performance of this current administration.
When you talk about party politics as well, party politics changed significantly, in my view as well. You would have seen an FNM that came in by no stretch of the imagination. That party was not ready for an election or an election win. And then, to add insult to injury, you have the leader of the party ousted in Parliament months out from an election.
Yes.
Again, an unprecedented move.
And it had a salubrious effect on his supporters because if you listen to the rhetoric within the FNM party, there are still people who are paying a price today for having supported that move lo these many months ago. That was a sea change in the FNM because both political parties, to different extents, but more or less the same, both political parties are the leader's party. The party draws its identity from the leader. The party draws its soul from the leader, which is why so many PLPs voted against the PLP in the election, because they were rejecting the leader. But in the case of Menace, there's a faction in the FNM that clearly is in the majority that believes he has withstood attack after attack after attack after attack on his leadership and maintains his grip on his leadership, and that simply by surviving all of these attacks, he's demonstrated his
Leadership
suitability
ability. Yes.
to lead. The folks who have issues with Dr. Menace as a prime minister, as a leader, people complain about the fact that he won't give real interviews, that he'll only speak in sound bites, and that often those sound bites are more confusing and add confusion rather than clarity to the issue, and that sometimes he runs from the press. He makes promises that in many cases he has yet to fulfill. Those are criticisms set against the reality that the people who complained about him and forced his ouster are on the outside now. Every one of them.
But that's a
are on the
political
outside.
reality when
Yeah.
you choose a side.
Yes,
Then
absolutely.
You
you have
choose the
to-
wrong side.
yeah, you pay the
will
consequences.
be put in the wilderness.
Absolutely.
pay the
For a
price.
particular time. So, I
Absolutely.
don't understand why people are surprised that they would be on the outside. But what, Shanique, I want you to take this on. What we saw with a Menace in opposition and as leader of the opposition, how the missteps and leader, as opposition leader, if you can equate those to some of the missteps in government that we are seeing right now, but how we were still able to overcome them. And I'm curious as to sort of how this is going to play out. I'm sort of going now forward. How is this going to play out in the future? He's made some missteps.
He has made some missteps, he's made some gaffes. And the thing is, in preparation for just today's show, many people feel as though, yes, he's made missteps. Yes, he's put his foot in his mouth. But what continues to endear, up to now, menace to the Bahamian public is the fact that for the first time, a sitting prime minister, someone in power, is going to apologize and almost present himself as human. Listen, I'm just like you. I made a mistake. I'm still learning this role. I'm still learning this office. And so I apologize for what I would have said. I apologize for misspeaking. And so people feel as though, you know what, I can kind of sort of give him that little leeway that he needs. After all, he was human enough. He was humble enough to come and apologize for something he did.
doesn't have that hubris that an Ingram or even a Christie
Yes.
or Pendling to some extent may have had.
Remember the PLP's assertion that there was, on many occasions, no apology necessary.
Yes.
They refused to
That
apologize
pissed a
for
lot
a
of people
number
off.
of
Yes.
things.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so we're still on the issue of party politics. You have now Philip Brave Davis, who has been formally elected as the leader of the opposition PLP, with just a small group in Parliament. What does that signal for the PLP? Because it's always been said that Brave Davis has sort of been the leader in waiting. He was sort of waiting Christie out. So now comes the opportunity. But what is that going to mean for the PLP? And can they be a strong enough opposition?
I think it's wonderful that Mr. Davis has had this long dream of his for many years fulfilled. Many people feel as though it's pretty much of the same. That what is he going to bring to the table? That this man, the PLP, in its very sort of wounded kind of image, that Davis is not the person to present this sort of new front, new image, new message that the PLP so desperately needs. Now, he has been very vocal, kind of hitting at a number of things, speaking out about a number of things that this current administration has done, is doing, has said. But people say, wait a minute, though. It's only, what 7 months ago, perhaps, 8 months ago that you all were in the same seat. What were you saying then? You were pretty quiet. So I feel as though people are going to continue sort of weighing it out with him and saying, you're not qualified to speak on this or the next thing. And they're really, really looking for a new face, a new image, a new message, a new energy that they feel as though that Davis perhaps is not the one to bring it.
One of the things that you cannot deny is the PLP is really functioning as an opposition in terms of their attack on the government and continuing at every turn. Quincy disagrees. At every turn, there is a unrelenting criticism
That they are doing that, yes.
on the government and the Menace administration.
When Fred Mitchell became the chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party, he made it very plain that, to use his words or paraphrase, that they would meet the government on every corner to argue for their view. The PLP's strategy with respect to its small numbers is oppose, oppose, oppose. There is also a desire to retroactively justify the course of action taken by the Christie administration, a need to defend the record. What we did was good, and here's why. What you're doing is bad because it's different from what we did. What you're doing is bad because it's far less prevalent than it would be if they were really effective as an opposition. A political opposition, the purpose is to sharpen the government's legislation and to ensure that there is balance in the representation. What the Christie PLP did is now the past. What the Davis PLP is doing is supposed to be the future. But remember, this is a party that has said no apologies are necessary. We didn't do anything wrong.
And they have not done it.
So you think they still have not?
We did not lose the election
Yes.
because the PLP was wrong. We lost the election because people were rejecting Perry Christie. We lost the election because the FNM ran a great propaganda campaign, and privately they'll say they lost the election because people spent a lot of money. They still refuse to accept that the message of the Progressive Liberal Party is in some way responsible for the loss.
For the loss, and Jerome as well, as Quincy pointed out, fantastic. Yes, they're objecting at every end, opposing at everything, but people are not buying into it. It almost is just continuing to fall on just fallow ground.
A first this year as well, you saw being hauled before the court.
Hallelujah.
Before the courts, former cabinet ministers, Ken Dorsett, Shane Gibson, Frank Smith as well. This, I'm not quite sure. Well, when it happened, you knew sort of where people stood politically because they came down. Now, months later, the Frank Smith matter I think is now before the courts actively. But where do you get a sense that people are with this, and how do you think this is going to play out? In that it is all part of the Menace administration's push to bring more transparency and accountability to governance and to government.
This anti-corruption move, as they sort of, the umbrella word that they've put on there about what's happening, people applaud it. They're very happy to see it. But then now people are saying, okay, what else? You've brought now three
and who
people.
Else? The question
And
who,
they're still asking that.
Yeah.
Yes. Who else? Okay, you all stop it. What's happening? What's going on? That's the only thing y'all were talking about. And so people are still, quite frankly, Jerome, very thirsty for blood. And it's unfortunate. But they want to see this stuff because they feel as though that the former administration has a lot to be accountable for, more than this administration is bringing to the table, and they want to see more.
You look at it in the case of a BPL where people have been hauled before the courts, fired, etc., at varying levels. At first, it seemed to be at a lower level, but just recently now you see a sort of a change in the executives in the head, which sort of speaks to how everybody's being held accountable. Do you predict, though, that we will see more of that? I think, there are audits going on all over the place.
Yes.
And is it necessary? Do you think people will have an appetite for it a year from now?
Yes, absolutely. We will see more of it. And whether or not it is something that people will continue to have an appetite for depends, I believe, on the outcome of those attempts to hold people accountable that are presently in train. Don't forget, the former chairman of BAIC was exonerated after having been hauled before the courts and after having charges levied against him. His name was more or less cleared in the public arena. And so there is already precedent for, we hauling them before the court, but we can just let them go. In his case, there was no evidence that he had done anything wrong, right? I think that's a much different circumstance than either Shane Gibson, Ken Dorsett, or Frank Smith faces. But in terms of the parastatals, the semi-government agencies, the fact is, as consumers, we believe, I believe rightly, that we have been poorly served by them. And as Shanique says, we want blood. We want to see them held accountable for the horrible service that we've been made to endure for the last however many years.
Folks, we are at the point of our first break. This has been a dynamic first segment. We have lots more to talk about. Stay with us. We will be right back. More on the record right after this.
This segment is sponsored by Percy's Island Game.
Honey, did you call the wrecker? I'm here on the side of the road. I can't believe this car is broken down again. Okay, all right, later.
It's beginning to look a lot like cash money. With the game, you know. Island Game is giving away cash to brighten up your day. And the golden ticket that will make you save. It's beginning to look like the best cash money ever. When you play with us.
Deposit $20 on your Island Game account and be one of 60 cash prize winners. Or maybe, just maybe, get a golden ticket for a chance to win a new car, trips around the world, or other great prizes. But only if you play at Percy's The Island Game.
Do you believe in light? Do you believe in love? Do you believe in precious moments? Do you believe in magic? Do you believe in tradition? I believe in the best Christmas ever. For everyone. Everywhere. Believe in best. Live.
We are back. More on the record. Tonight we're discussing our Bahamaland year in review. My guests, Shanique Miller and Quincy Parker. We started out really with the election and the fall, I call it the fallout, but so much has occurred since those May elections. One of the things we found out, the Minister of Finance came to the House of Assembly and said, listen, the cupboards are bare. And we are, in effect, taking, I don't know if they call it austerity, but we're taking some austerity measures. We're trimming the fat, et cetera. There has been some pushback from that, from certain circles, but really, I want to sort of get both of you to give me your opinions on what has been the public appetite for all of these things that have been happening in relation to the economic picture that was painted by the government and some of the things that they have done since, including the let's give the MPs a raise.
Oh boy, yeah, because it's like on one end you're saying, okay, we have to take austere measures because the cupboards are bare. And on the other end, you're kind of saying, listen, we need to increase the salaries of members of parliament. Well, starting on that point, people are saying, no way is this the right time. Timing is poor. And even if you have to consider an increase in salary for members of parliament, 3 years in, maybe let's just see what happens with the economy by then, and then bring that to the people. As far as the austere measures, I think people are understanding, and then they're not understanding, particularly those party diehards. You would see on social media, you would see in various closed conversations or wherever it is, perhaps even over coffee in a public arena, people are saying, what is this F&M government doing It is not doing enough. I'm not feeling anything. My child up the street down there ain't feeling nothing. Where my job is, where's my opportunity? Bahamians are saying, listen, particularly those who supported the FNM or support the FNM, it's my time. It's the people's time. And what's going on though?
Who people?
The people
Who
who
are
burn
these
it,
people?
the people who burn the torch or burn it bright for whoever they burned it for. But the point is, what's going on, FNM? This stuff is taking a little while to trickle down to us, and we're fed up.
Quincy, is that a realistic expectation?
What, that things are going to trickle down?
That things should be happening. I should see something. I should feel something.
Well, yes and no. Nothing from nothing leaves nothing. And if the cupboards are bare, you could want trickle down all you want. All you can get is dust because there ain't no money there, right? And I've had conversations with the last one. I went to buy a particular good in a particular place, and the fella stopped me on my way into the purveyor's establishment and said, "Quincy Parker," because he heard me talking to my daughter. "Yes, sir." "Man, you need to ask so and so. I live in St. Anne's." This was right before I had the Simonette on my show, and I live in St. Anne's, and I need them contracts, man. What happened to the contracts? And the people who got used to getting the small contract from the MP in the constituency and using that as the foundation for their livelihood are hurting. Because the first austerity measure, which they did not call an austerity measure, and which they didn't publicize, was the cabinet was told, point blank, you have to cut your constituency spending by 75%. So that means what you spent, what your predecessor spent 6 months ago.
Wow.
You have to explain to those people in your constituency who expect that $100 contract, that the contract is now worth only $25.
But you said you used a word there that I think speaks to a larger problem: expect.
Yes.
There is an expectation of some things.
Yes, and I think there's the note that I have to myself here is blood in my eye. There's an old reggae song. Let me come back with blood in my eye, right? What it is it's a vengeance song. You did me something, I coming back, I can get you. And our politics is all about vengeance.
Yes.
Our politics is all about you did me wrong, so I can vote for the other fella just to screw you. And now that they have voted for the other fella just to screw you, now they got to live with the other fella, right? And the other fella's position is, we're going to make things transparent, we're going to hold ourselves accountable, and unfortunately for you, that means we ain't giving you a $100 contract if we could only afford a $25 contract.
And that's making the people upset, because they're like, wait a minute, hold on. The other people did this to me. Now it's my time. It's the people's time, and I can't go and do it to them. They're very, very angry, and it's not even so quiet anymore, this rumbling that's taking place. And so before it explodes in the FNM's face, I think they need to have something happen.
I do have a question, though. Is this not the right time in terms of when you look at the period of governance, is this not the right time to make those difficult, harsh, unpopular decisions?
Absolutely.
I always maintain that if you're going to do something, do it early in your administration. Let the people row and give it time to sort of take root.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. Let it settle, because by this time next year, presuming that by this time next year, the actions that have been taken have begun to bear fruit, then you can stand on your record and say, listen, you see, we know what we're doing.
Yes.
Just give us time to work this out.
Yes.
Both the PLP and FNM have new chairman.
Yes.
And it's a clash of the titans in many ways. I think that has become a whole new political stage and a whole new drama. Carl Culmer versus a Fred Mitchell. A newcomer to frontline politics and a veteran.
Yes.
Head to head.
Yes.
Go ahead, Quincy, I'll give you that.
Mr. Culmer is at a distinct disadvantage in that he is not a known entity. He is known within the FNL, but on the national stage, which is where a party chairman in the Bahamas has to shine, as importantly as within the party infrastructure, he is at a distinct disadvantage. And what he has brought to the public arena thus far does not cover him in glory. Despite the obstructionist and downright paranoid sometimes screeds that Fred Mitchell releases, they are at least effective as language. They are effective as tools of communication. They put a position and they make an assertion. The things that Mr. Culmer has brought to the public arena are much weaker. And I think that if he is going to be an effective public face of the political party, that he will have to be much, much stronger and have, frankly speaking, he'll have to take some lessons from Fred in how to do public engagement, because right now he's getting his butt whooped.
Interesting. Also on the political scene, the DNA has a new DNA, pardon the pun. They have selected a new leader in Chris Mortimer and a new deputy in Arinthia Kumalafe. Is there a future for the DNA? Will you've come through 2 elections? You would have done. Come on, guys. You would have done worse the second time around, but the party is still moving forward. Brian McCartney stepped back and handed the
stepped back.
Well,
he stepped back. Okay.
Yeah, or stepped aside, left to see it. But is there a future for the DNA, and particularly in this dispensation, this political dispensation we're in right now? Either of you.
I have one thing to say, and then I'll let Shanique. I never believed the DNA existed. I refer to it in the public arena on a number of occasions as a figment of our imagination. And I've referred to Brian McCartney as a collective dream. I don't think that there are any of us who believe that he ever represented what he purported to represent. And I don't think there are any of us who really believe that the so-called Democratic National Alliance really ever existed as more than an idea, and certainly not as a viable alternative government. There's no way in hell that any of us thought that party could possibly be a government.
Shanique?
I agree. It was a thought that represented something for a brief moment, and then they lost it. I'm not sure how they lost it, where they lost it, and I'm talking with Brian McCartney as leader. Something just went very, very wrong, and so he did the right thing by stepping aside after losing 2 elections. He did the right thing by stepping aside. But the DNA, I don't see a future. In fact, the DNA is a non-mention. I don't even know what the DNA does.
He actually surprised me when he said the DNA.
No, I was quite surprised. Yes. They are still, by all accounts, they're still
and here's the problem,
an entity
though.
that's in existence.
The problem is Chris Mortimer is a good fellow. He's a solid political prospect. Arinthia Kumalafe is brilliant.
She's a bright light. To me, she's the kind of person that we need in frontline politics.
Had we been talking about a DNA with Chris Mortimer as leader and Arinthia Kumalafe as deputy 5 years ago, I think we'd be having an entirely different conversation. So you think the public
really has no appetite anymore? They've lost it completely?
I feel that way based on the responses that come to me.
As we go into the break, this election and this year has seen the departure publicly of a generation of politicians. Christie and his generation of leader, for the most part, have gone. The difference I find in the parties is that an F&M will do a good job or a better job of purging itself of that older generation. But the PLP seems to have a little more difficulty in doing that, in that it's a little more institutionalized. And when you have a figure like a Bradley Roberts, who is still issuing statements and still getting in the media. I see a couple of weeks ago, Leslie Miller would have been in the media commenting. What does that do for the, for the presence, I call it, of the party, for the perception, for the we've turned over a new leaf narrative of the party?
Just as I said, it's the same old faces there. People see this as an antiquated party with antiquated leadership, even though it's now Philip Brave Davis, but they see the same players. They are not at all convinced. They don't feel the energy and see the newness. The message is pretty much the same. You can try, name it, whatever you want to name it, the new PLP. The fact is, it's the same PLP with the same players, the same people calling the shots from behind, and so it gives that same stench.
Quincy? That's the first time I see you. That's it? Okay, with that, thank you very much. We are at the midpoint in our show. We are discussing our Bahamaland year in review. Quincy Parker, Shanique Miller, both talk show hosts and journalists, giving some very insightful views. When we come back, we're going to look at some more national issues. We're going to look at things like crime, new commissioner of police, etc. A lot of things that have played out this year that certainly have defined 2017. Stay with us. We are back right after this.
Do you believe in light? Do you believe in love? Do you believe in precious moments? Do you believe in magic? Do you believe in tradition? I believe in the best Christmas ever. For everyone. Everywhere. Believe in best. Live.
Honey, did you call the wrecker? I'm here on the side of the road. I can't believe this car is broken down again. Okay, all right, later.
It's beginning to look a lot like cash money. With the game, you know. Island game is giving away cash to brighten up your day. And the golden ticket that will make you save. It's beginning to look like the best cash money ever. When you play with us.
Deposit $20 on your Island game account and be one of 60 cash prize winners. Or maybe, just maybe, get a golden ticket for a chance to win a new car, trips around the world, or other great prizes. But only if you play at Percy's The Island Game.
Welcome back to the second portion of tonight's show. Our Bahamaland year in review. That's our topic tonight. Shanique Miller and Quincy Parker are my guests for the show. Soon after taking office, the new Minister of National Security laid out a plan to tackle crime. Came under some criticism for it. You know, as a former high-ranking police officer, he would have thought that he would have brought some previously unheld insight into the crime situation. But thus far, there seems to be a slowing, particularly of murders.
Yes.
And it's very strange because sometimes you go for a quiet period and then all of a sudden, you know, it escalates. You've got, you know. But for the most part, I want your take on sort of how is the Marvin Dames doing, and you know, has the landscape of crime changed any, and have the plans begun to bear any kind of fruit thus far?
In my view, it is entirely too early to ascribe any change in our crime environment directly to Marvin Dames' intervention. I think the police have had an unfair reading from the public because the police force is subject to such political interference. It is the most important of our personal security agencies, and as a result, it's one that everybody feels qualified to comment on.
It's like being a journalist.
Exactly. Right?
Everyone
Exactly.
tells you how to do your job.
Everybody knows how to do your job.
Yeah.
But the fact is, I believe that the police have been working for decades to curb the issues that are facing this community, and for any politician to take credit for any change in our crime situation is hubris of the worst sort. Marvin Dames, as a former policeman, ought to know that more than anyone else. And so I doubt that he would be silly enough to say in 6 months his crime plan is working.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a new commissioner of police too. Do you think the handing over, the changing, was handled properly? Ellison Greenslade seemed to disappear. We weren't quite sure if he was on a vacation or leave of absence.
Traveling the world.
You didn't know what was happening, and then all of a sudden, Anthony Ferguson becomes the new police commissioner, and Ellison Greenslade is off to a diplomatic post, which seems to be a trend now for former police commissioners. So, but yeah, your take on sort of that whole transfer of power and authority.
I think it's one of the biggest fumbles that this administration has had.
But does it speak to political interference? Though?
It certainly does. It's very clear that it's politically that everything that transpired obviously was politically motivated and handled. I wish Anthony Ferguson, I wish him great success. Speaking of what's happened since the FNM came into power, I'd say November has gone on record as the quietest month in a number of years, so kudos to the Royal Bahamas Police Force. But Anthony Ferguson, I've heard it said on the ground by the guys on the ground that he is a policeman's policeman. Well, they said that about Greenslade, you know, but he's a policeman's policeman. He's gone through the trenches, he's gone through the ranks, etc. And so we only could wish him very well. But why did it have to be handled that way, almost in secrecy? Greenslade someplace dodging behind a corner looking to see when they can beckon to him to come out and sit by the table, and you know, and Anthony Ferguson there just waiting, you know, because he's the one who was appointed next. Why do things have to be so cumbersome in this country and not just sort of just laid out on the table for us all to see and understand?
I thought a travesty too was, if you have a retiring police commissioner, I think he should be celebrated properly. And I did not get that sense
not at all
with an Ellison Greenslade.
I have a slightly alternative view. Mr. Greenslade was tapped as the new High Commissioner to the UK, which is the diplomatic post he's going to take up. The reason for his silence, the reason that he is given for his silence, and my own sources in foreign affairs suggest that there is some legitimacy to this statement, is that there was a due diligence process being undertaken, and the best policy for him was to just sit quietly and let them do their due diligence.
Well, then
why not share that?
No, I say all of this.
Quincy, I hear you, but
I don't.
You know, perception is reality.
Yes.
I always say that. And governments do a very poor job.
Thank you. Exactly.
In many instances, of informing the public on what is happening, and we know this in this business. In the absence of information, there is speculation.
Yes.
So now you have it out there. So no matter what was happening behind the scenes, the perception is the man was kicked out and unceremoniously
and
kicked
told
out.
to put your fingers on your lip and sit in the corner
I mean,
quiet.
You know, it is what it is.
No.
I want to move forward a bit. September 8th, tragedy in many ways, and the strongest storm of the century would have tipped the southern Bahamas. And for as horrible as that was, I think Bahamians have a lot to be grateful for, because there was a time this entire country was in the path of that storm. One of the things that Prime Minister Menace did, unprecedented in many ways, he evacuated people from those islands. And in some instances, he came under criticism for it, and others say he may have just saved lives. Do you see that as being now the basis for, does that set a precedent? Is that now the basis for how we are going to react when we have these monster storms coming?
Evacuation, particularly of some of the islands that have less than 100 people living on them, has been, for a Category 4 or 5 storm, the recommendation of civil society and people with, it's been a recommendation for many a year. The reaction of past political administrations has been that it would be politically unpopular. That people, I ain't leaving, and you can't force me to leave. Menace and his advisors took a position that you're leaving if we got to drag you kicking and screaming. I think that was not only the right move, but it's long overdue. And I do think that going forward, depending on how the resettlement process is handled, that people will not resist evacuation quite so strongly as they have done in the past.
Following the hurricane, there was the suggestion that some of these places are uninhabitable. Why should we go back and rebuild a Duncantown, Ragged Island, Salina Point, Acklands? As Quincy said, you got maybe 100 people there. It needs all this infrastructure, etc. Was that the right thing to say? Is that the right approach to take? And akin to that, do you think that has affected the slow recovery in some instances? Because there is now the groundswell of criticism that the recovery effort is very slow. You talk to people on those islands, and very little has happened. From a government's perspective, because you have smaller groups like the Head Nose groups and other groups who are trying to help on an individual basis, but a slow recovery in many instances.
Slow recovery, based on what's proposed for Ragged Island, it certainly is going to take a number of years for that to come into fruition. And so people must understand. I think going forward, people will be opened to a mandatory evacuation because, obviously the move that happened this year saved lives, and so I think they will be open to it. They will be kind of like, okay, I think we have to move. This is a major storm. Let's not resist this. But we are quick to criticize for a number of things. But when you're talking about a green island and everything that goes into it,
and the solar energy,
exactly, and the engineering and environmentalists and so many different factions that have to come together to ensure that this takes place, I think it will take quite some time, and maybe that has not been explained as best as it could. Then, as far as perhaps, let's say, shutting down an island like Ragged Island, because why? It's 100 people, it's 50 people. I think that will be, these decisions that governments hate to make. I don't think they can make that because people love where they come from.
It's a home for many people.
People love where they come from. And they want to, okay, evacuate us for some time.
I don't care if I go there once a year. Yes. It's my home.
Right, evacuate us for some time, evacuate us for whatever this is, until the storm passes, and whatever it is that you have to do that you're proposing, but we want to go back home.
Quincy, I want you to jump in here. One of the largest criticisms of the former administration was they never seemed to be able to get the hurricane relief moving in enough time, and there are still places in the Bahamas that are suffering from Hurricane Joaquin. You go to parts of Grand Bahama and you see debris still piled up. Yes. Speaking of Grand Bahama, what does this administration really need to do to pull itself away from that or to get that moving? Because the reality is here you're going to rebuild, but my reality on a day-to-day basis, it's very different from what your plan is 6 months, a year from now.
Yeah. The problem that the administration faces goes back to your first statement in the show. The cupboard is bare. There's a statement in the Bible that's quoted and then paraphrased in another place in the same scriptures that money answereth all things. The problem that they have is there is no money, and they have to find money from somewhere. However, the truth is The Christie administration introduced a tax in January 2015 that between January 2015 and June 2016 pulled $1 billion out of an economy that was in recession. $1 billion. While that $1 billion was being sucked out of a recessionary economy, people were still shopping in Rupert Roberts food stores. People were still hopping on the plane to go shop in Miami. People were still paying St. Andrews school fees. The fact is, I actually disagree with the view that the Bahamas is broke.
I want you to hold that right there, because that takes us to our the other point in this discussion of looking at the economy and financial services. Stay with us. Our final segment on the record.
Christmas looks different for every Bahamian. What we watch, what we search for, what we give, who we give it to, and who we call. But no matter how different Christmas looks for all of us, when we look at the bigger picture, we see it's you and us together that makes Christmas, Christmas. Rev, you and us together.
Welcome back to this final segment in our final show of 2017. We're looking at the year in review. Shanique and Quincy are my guests. Quincy, as we went into the break, we really started to touch on sort of the economic state of affairs in the Bahamas. Two things significantly: the coming to office and the cupboards is bare comment, but also since that, having dodged a bullet in a further downgrade, and then also not being blacklisted,
right, yes.
I think helped to put a lot of people in financial services a bit at ease for a minute. Even though you have this commercial enterprise bill now coming, which has created its own stir, we would discuss that in a previous show, but sort of our state of economy and what the menace administration is facing in terms of trying to keep the country's economy on track. I mean, that's a tremendous undertaking, particularly when you come to office saying cupboards are bare.
Yeah, and the cupboards being bare is a relative statement, right? What it means for me is that there was a certain expectation based on the income statements that you would have read over, in this case, over the past 5 years, that you were in political opposition. You have, and also because you were on the Public Accounts Committee, you have access to the records of government spending and government income. So you look at what the income is supposed to be, you look at what the expenditures have been, and you walk in the door with a sense that, okay, I know how much money I got to work with.
You've drawn a conclusion on what you think you got to spend.
So you walk in the door and you expect to see a pile of money in the middle of the room, and instead you see a half of a bill on the floor, and you don't know where the rest of the pile is. And so what you say in that moment is that the cupboards are bare. But the reality is, if you wait 5 minutes, there's going to be a chute that opens up in that wall over there, and a pile of money is going to shoot in there. And if you wait another 30 seconds after that, a chute go open up over there, and another pile of money going to show up.
So you think he misspoke?
No, I don't think that this is what I'm saying. In the moment, when you say the cupboards are bare, that statement is reflective of, we do not have the money to spend at this moment. But what is truer, in my view, is there are so many commitments that have already been made that even if the chutes that open up bring in more money than I could conceive of in my wildest dreams, that money has already been spent.
Yep.
That's why they complain about the new commitments that they're finding every day. It's because it doesn't matter how much money you bring in. It doesn't matter how much money they get from road traffic, or how much money they get from Bahamas Air, or how much money they get from PPL, or how much money they get from VAT. What matters is every dollar that they earn has already been committed. And so that's part of the issue. And when he makes a statement that the cupboard is bare, it means that there's not a stream of revenue that is untouched from which you can spend.
Shanique, do you think the Bahamian people are prepared for the measures that must be put in place in order to attempt to grow the economy even further, and for us to be able to keep those commitments? I mean, when you look at the public service salary alone, and whether despite these attempts to streamline, cut back, cut the fat, whatever you want to call it, do you think Bahamian people are prepared for the measures that are coming? Because it's really just the beginning of what we're going to see.
Jerome, I don't think any society is prepared in any country, particularly here in the Bahamas, where people have been so hopeful for so long.
And given our excess, we are an excessive people.
Exactly.
I mean, you drive around now and the roads are jam-packed with people Christmas shopping.
And so, no, they are not prepared for what is and what is already, the measures already put in place, and of course for measures that will come. I visited Grand Bahama recently, and those people are just anxiously waiting for the government to do something that will get the wheels of the economy just turning again.
Definitely.
The new businesses that I find fascinating, Jerome, and the last 30 seconds on this, is the car import business. Just think about that. You have an economy that's broke, right? People are broke, poor. But there are people who can import cars from Japan.
And those are sold.
And as soon as the car get on the boat, it's sold. Or before the car get on the boat, somebody already bought it, right? You paying $200 for a car.
Open the classifieds.
Already
about the cars,
It just, everywhere like if I'm tooling around in my Jeep now, and I look on the side of the road, 4 cars for sale. 400 yards up the road, 7 cars for sale.
And you go back in a few days and those cars are gone.
Those cars are
gone.
gone. So just purely from the peripheral spending, you look at it and you realize it's not a question of this country being broke. I think Michael Halkitis was something that he and I were talking about towards the end of the Christie administration, was the size of the Bahamian economy. We've been told that it's a $7 or $8 billion economy, but just the amount of money they pulled out in VAT tells you there's something wrong with that. It's much closer to a $10 billion economy than it is to a $7 billion.
Quincy, has to be. You need only come through customs on a Sunday. Especially now. And you see what people, or the amount of trucks that you see leaving the dock, or the things that are piled up coming in. But there is that disparity, though, in wealth, because you drive over the hill, you go in some areas, and you see the state that some of our people live in. But as you said during the break, you go in a sports center, and you walk to the tennis shoe section.
The most expensive.
And they're lit.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to get my Jordans, and I'm going to get Jordans from my son, and I'm going to get Jordans from my nephew, and I'm going to get Jordans for that fellow who my son likes.
And I need a what is it, iPhone 8?
That's right, yes.
Oh, the X is out now. Don't forget.
Yeah, the X.
We can't get the X here yet, but give it time.
We can get it.
And that speaks to a whole different thing in our country, where priority has to take, because if you're crying because you're hurting financially, then make some other kinds of decisions. But that's a whole different show and different topic.
That's a whole other show.
Yeah.
As we sort of wind down, I'm going to ask you the most memorable moment for you in 2017, the thing that would have stuck out in your mind that, 5 years from now when you think back, the one thing you're going to remember the most about 2017 and why?
Wow, I think I'll go back to politics and the campaign season. I think it was when former Prime Minister Perry Christie, that finger that echoed around the region.
He flipped the bird.
That bird, yes, the bird that he flipped. I mean, to see a leader who, a veteran leader who is supposed to be composed and in charge of his emotional responses, to see him lose it that way, and just sort of like curse the country and say, man, forget y'all. That was something, and you wonder what was going through your mind that pushed you to there. That's something that people continue to kind of talk about, something that I continue to remember and think of.
Do you think that's really going to be a stain on his legacy?
Among many.
Quincy, your 2017 moment.
Watching Hubert Menace as Prime Minister celebrate the completion of the Bahama opening and sale, which as the leader in the opposition, he promised to reverse should he become Prime Minister. He said that he would find an appropriate buyer and effect a real sale of Bahama. And instead, he has simply completed the process begun by Mr. Christie and co. And then he has the temerity to stand in front of the cameras and celebrate as though he has done something. So, Mr. Prime Minister, I applaud you.
You're the real MVP.
Yeah. Now, as we look forward, of course, this has been a show that has looked for 2017. I want us to, as we wrap up now, really give your views on what you think will be the major challenges for this country in 2018. And whether or not that includes the government, it's up to you. But what do you see as some of the major challenges facing us in 2018?
Well, I'll be brief. I certainly think getting this economy on the right path, on the right foot, is something the government is going to have challenges with, and have to be very creative in what it does and how it does it, because every island is screaming for something, particularly the major ones, Grand Bahama, New Providence, other pockets and other areas, Eleuthera, and so that needs to be addressed, and certainly, we're going to wait and see how that happens, how it unfolds. Crime is something that people want a handle on, because after all, this our number one industry is tourism. We do not want to continue kind of sending out messages of what's been sent out, in times past. And so certainly to continue to keep peace on the streets in our country, to protect each resident, each visitor, and to let them know that they're safe. Quality of life is extremely important, and that has affected quality of life substantially.
Quincy?
Bill Clinton used to love to quote, "It's the economy, stupid." And as a former business editor, I would have to echo, it's the economy. But I would like to say that I think the thing that must be the focus and the thing that will continue to challenge the country most in 2018 is the social agenda. I think that we are afflicted by a disintegrating and almost unrecognizable family structure. We need to rethink what a family is, because it ain't the same as we've always. It isn't mommy and daddy and two kids in a house with a picket fence and a VW parked in the front. No, it's not. That's not the reality of the Bahamian family anymore, if it ever was. And we need to understand what our true social structure is and start working to strengthen it, because the fact is, it doesn't matter how much money we have, we can see that every day. There's money flowing around in the economy in both the formal and informal sectors, and still life is bad for so many people. So I think we have to figure out our social agenda, and I think that's really what we're going to do. We're going to have to focus on in 2018. I would also like to say there has to be some resolution to the dump.
Good point, which we did not speak to. Very good point. Folks, we are at the end of our show. I want to thank you for coming on. I do want to take a moment, though, to recognize this year we saw the passing of some great men and women in the persons of Dr. Bernard Nottage, Arlington Butler, cultural icon Ronnie Butler, and so many others. We could do a whole show talking about the people who have passed, but certainly we wanted to bring some attention to and recognize the many men and women who have passed away in 2017, and they certainly will be remembered and will be missed. And I want to thank you all for coming on and helping me ring the year out in the right way. We have lots to talk about in 2018. A very interesting year. So we hope that you have enjoyed tonight's show. We hope that you have enjoyed our season. Special thanks to Shanique Miller, Quincy Parker, my producer, technical staff, and of course you, the audience, for joining us week after week for more On the Record. We, of course, will be back in the new year. I'd like to thank you for staying with us during 2017, and we promise to bring you more interesting discussions and debates in 2018. So, on behalf of the On the Record team, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a safe and prosperous New Year. Once again, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you in 2018.